friends, and welcome to part 2 of my DIY earring tutorial. So in this tutorial we're going to focus on patterns for your clay. So this video is sped up a little bit just because there are a few different patterns to work through. So the first thing that I'm going to do is go over conditioning my clay. So as you could see, I wiggled it, I rolled it, and I rolled it up into a little ball before rolling it flat. Here I've cut a circle out and I'm playing around with different shapes. So I have a plastic knife here and all I'm doing is cutting my circle in half. So that might be good for dangle components if you were going to do like a 3-drop dangle or even a 2-drop dangle. Really good for that. So I've got some white clay here, and as you can see I haven't really done a great job of cleaning away any of that cinnamon colour that I've just used. So something really important when you're using a white, especially on its own, is to make sure everything is super clean and tidy. So any of the colour left behind from any other colours, any lint, it's going to pick up on that white. So I probably wouldn't recommend doing white earrings just on their own. Like I have here, I'm mixing in a little bit of granite because the granite is going to disguise any little lint particles or any dust particles that may be on your baking paper or maybe on your hands. So again, I need to condition this and I'm mixing my two colours together. So giving it a roll, giving it a little bit of a wiggle, squishing it together to try and make it nice and soft and workable. I've been working with polymer clay for quite a few years now, 4 years I think, and I started off by making lanyards. So I'm quite into fashion and outfits and that kind of thing, and I wanted a lanyard to go with all of my different teacher outfits. So I worked out that that was going to be quite expensive quite quickly by the time I bought all my different lanyards to go with my outfits. So I thought, this looks like pretty good fun. I'm going to start making polymer clay lanyards myself, and ever since I started I just fell in love with it and it's grown from there. So making earrings to go with my outfits, making earrings just to be a bit creative after work, I just love it. So working that clay together there, almost all done. So again, I'm rolling it into a ball before I roll it out into a slab, and that's so when I roll it out I don't have any cracks in the bottom or the top of my slab. Any cracks that you may have when you bake them, they are going to get worse, so it's important that you don't have any in there to begin with. So I've got my granite look, and here I've got my triangle cutter. If I wasn't going to wipe this after I used this cutter on the cinnamon, it would leave a mark. So it's important, especially if you're going from a darker color to a lighter color, or say a white to a black, it's important that you wipe your cutters down, otherwise you will leave a little bit of color behind. So here I haven't wiped this cutter down to start with. You can't so much tell on the circle, but you can definitely tell on the clay that's left behind. So if I'm going to use any more of this clay after I've cut out all of my little bits and pieces, what I'm going to need to do is give that another mix so that that color, that cinnamon color, is mixed in. So again, it doesn't matter if your clay sticks in your cutter a little bit, just make sure you're being really careful and really gentle when you're pulling it out so you don't distort any of your shapes. So sometimes you might get a little bit of clay residue left behind after you've cut your circle out or you've cut your triangle out. One little tip and trick is to get your clay ball that you've pulled off and rub it on your baking paper or rub it on your tile, and that will pick up any bits of clay that are stuck down to your work surface. So as I'm going, I'm just playing along with a couple of shape ideas just to see what I might like, and this is important because I'm going to put some holes in this later so that I can attach my jump rings, and I want to make sure that I'm putting them in the right spots. So to start with, I'm going to use my toothpick, and you can see I'm giving it a little bit of a twist. I'm just pressing it down. Now that's like a pilot hole. what I've done now is I've picked it up, I've supported that disc, I've supported my clay piece on either side of the hole with my fingers, and I'm twisting and gently pushing that toothpick through. If you were just going to push that toothpick just straight through and you weren't going to twist it and you weren't doing it carefully, you would distort your clay shape. So remember, this video is sped up. This is about twice the speed of what I was doing it. So I was going fairly slowly as I was putting holes in these pieces. As you get into more advanced clay techniques, and if this is something that you're interested in, if you're going to build up your tools, me personally, now I've got more tools and I put my holes in afterwards, but as a beginner you're getting the same effect. It's just a bit more time consuming to put your holes in before. So rolling my clay up again, making sure I don't have any of those fold marks. Remember, if I roll that out, it's going to form a crack. So rolling out my clay, lifting it up as I go so that I've got a nice even surface, using my depth guides and my acrylic roller. So I've just checked that I will get enough for 2 earrings with my clay cutter. Sometimes if you're not getting enough, you may need to get a bigger base slab. So here I'm making a terrazzo pattern. All I'm doing is I'm just using my clay that I've already conditioned, and I'm ripping and tearing tiny little bits and sticking them onto the slab. So the base, that flat bit that we rolled out first, and what I'm rolling now, in clay terms we call this a clay slab. So breaking off a little bit of the grey granite, and again I'm conditioning that tiny little bit there, and I'm going to use the same rip and tear technique, and I'm just going to stick that straight down onto my slab. So after each colour I'll use the roller, and that's to amalgamate those layers, squish them in together so that I don't have any raised bits and nothing falls off in the oven. So the last colour I'm adding to my terrazzo is black. I just love this technique. It's so easy to do and so effective. The smaller your pieces, the smaller I would recommend you be able to cut. If you're using really large pieces to pattern your terrazzo, I would probably recommend larger cutters, just so that you're getting a little bit of all of your pattern on all of your cutout pieces. So here I've rolled it out and I've just noticed I've got some spaces. I'm just going back in and filling those in. So making sure that when I cut out my pattern pieces, as well as using the same shape and size cutter, I'm trying to get the same amount and same kind of coloured patterned on each of my pieces as well. And again, just having a bit of a play around with different shapes and different ways that I might like to put it together. So I've noticed here I've got enough for a larger cutout circle. I don't have enough for another piece, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this bit up and pop it to the side, and I'm going to make another matching circle piece here. So what I'll have to do is start right from the start, and I will have to make some white mixed with the grey granite to make like a white fleck again for my base of my slab. So again, going through the whole process to colour mix, I'm putting my 2 colours together, and then once they're kind of squished a little bit like they are here and rolling, I'm just going through the normal conditioning process of rolling, wiggling, twisting, and making that come together really nicely. Good thing about polymer clay is you don't have to start with the start of your earrings and sit down and make all the way until your earrings have the post glued on the back. What you might want to do is make a couple of earrings, and then I usually will create all of mine and then put them in the oven, and then I might have a little bit of a break then and come back to it another day. I probably wouldn't leave it as it is at the moment, where I've only got a couple of pairs, unless I was going to bake them and come back to them later, just because anything that you leave uncovered like this, it will collect any dust particles or any lint that's floating around in the air. If you are going to leave it at this point and you might come back to it, say tomorrow or the next day, it's only going to be like a short amount of time before you come back and finish making the clay parts of your earrings. What you might like to do is put a piece of cling wrap over the top, or put them in an airtight container, just so they're not collecting any of that. So any clay that's left over that you're storing, make sure if you're going to keep it that it's going to go either back into those little Ziploc bags or again into an airtight container, otherwise it will dry out and it's not going to be the best to use later on. So following all of my steps again, I have just used the rip and pull technique with all of my colours. I haven't rolled as I went this time, but I know how far apart everything's spaced out, and I'm making sure that none of my colours are going to touch, just so that they look nice and separate and it's giving me that terrazzo look that I'm looking for. You probably saw a little bit earlier what I did is I just roughly sized up my circle so I knew how much to cover, and that means that I can use that little bit of clay if I cut that bit of coloured bit out later on for something else. So again, dotting as I go. If you find that your clay is super sticky and straight away as soon as you go to put a hole in it, it's losing form, what you could do is leave it for a little bit until it cools down, like half an hour, and then come back to it to finish that off. So I've just done my pilot dots there, and I'm going to put those holes in later because I've worked with that clay a lot and it is quite soft. So here I'm conditioning some black, and what I'm going to make now is some spots. So when you're working with spots or stripes or anything that you want to be quite uniform, the only thing you have to pay attention to here is that you're getting things roughly the same size. So rolling out my black, and I'm going to use the cinnamon colour for the spots. So I'm just rolling them into tiny little balls, and I'm sticking the balls just straight onto the black clay. So give them a little squish, just a tiny little bit, so that when you roll your acrylic roller over the top, it will actually stick. Sometimes if you just place them down and you don't give them a little press, when you roll your roller over the top, it'll stick to the roller and not the clay, and it won't mesh into your slab like you want it to. So you can notice that my balls here that I'm rolling on are pretty much the same size. That means when I roll it all out, my dots will be the same size. Just adding a few more on now, and then I will be ready to roll. So making sure I'm using my depth guides, and I'm rolling kind of half one way and then turning my slab and rolling half the other way. Now this is because if I roll all the one way and I press down with my roller and just keep pushing it out, what's going to happen is I'm going to have ovals. They're not going to turn into nice circles. So roll it out kind of half one way and then half the other, and by the time you've done that, you should get a nice circle shape. So when you're cutting out dangle toppers, one thing to be mindful of is the size of the cutter that you're using. So here I've used, if you've got just like the basic kit, the smaller circle. If you've got the deluxe kit, not the super tiny circle, like the middle circle. Now the reason for that, and that's because if you use a cutter that's so able to put a hole in for your jump ring, so to connect the top of your dangle that you've got there, by the time you put a hole in for the jump ring to attach the bottom of your dangle, you're not going to be able to actually glue on the back of your earring post. So if you open up the pack of your earring findings, the earring post there is going to fit on all of them, but like I said, if you've got the deluxe kit, don't use that tiny little circle for your earring toppers because you won't be able to fit a post on the back. So here what I'm making is some stripes. Now with my stripes, I'm rolling out a really thin, I guess, sausage, or a snake, a really thin sausage or a snake, and I'm sitting that on my clay slab. So making sure as much as I can that these are evenly spaced apart. You can use your finger just to pinch off the end, or you might like to use a plastic knife or a butter knife. I'm personally fine with just using my nails just to pinch that bit off. This is so that we don't have the rest of the snake just hanging over the edge. It's going to probably fold back into your clay slab, and it's just not going to be manageable. So here, if you don't roll it in, it's going to be a little bit raised. As long as you've pressed it on a little bit, if you put that in the oven, it should be fine. So here I've turned it lengthways with my roller, and that's so it spreads out nicely. If I went the other way with this, it will probably squish out my stripes unevenly, and that's something that I want to avoid. I want to keep them nice and thin and straight. So just making a little bit extra there, and I'm going to use my arch cutter, so conditioning up that cinnamon colour. If you've got the deluxe kit and you've got that arch, you will have got a little bit of corn flour in a little plastic pot. That corn flour is going to make sure no clay gets stuck in those tiny little segments. So just dip it in a little bit and then press into your clay as normal. So you will have just a tiny little bit of corn flour left over on your polymer clay slab. This is totally fine. It's not going to affect it baking in the oven. When we come to the sanding part of things, we're using wet dry sandpaper, and anything that hasn't just like dusted off in the process of moving your clay from your work surface into the oven, it's going to come off when we wash it with the wet dry sandpaper or wash it after using the wet dry sandpaper. So totally fine to use that. That's my preference. Some people do use a little bit of water, but I find that sometimes it can just make things a bit slippery. It doesn't do as good of a job as the corn flour does. So you'll notice too, I didn't press quite as hard as I needed to with that cutter, and I've just used that plastic knife to tidy up my edges. Again, I'm trying to clean my work surface down as much as I can as I go. So I've got my arches out, and I think that the white granite would be a really nice option for the stud toppers for these dangles. So again, rolling out and using that middle cutter. Again, it's got a little bit of black on it, so I'm going to use a baby wipe. If you don't have a baby wipe, you might like to use just a bit of water and paper towel. That's going to clean off any residue so that when you use your cutter, your clay is kept nice and clean. So it's really important here that you do go back through and you make sure anything that's going to be turned into a dangle or a hoop, that you do go through and put your holes in. So if you don't do this at this point or before you put it into the oven, with the kit that you've been provided with, you don't have any way to put them in afterwards. The only real save for if you have baked them and you haven't put the holes in is if you had a drill and a really tiny drill bit. So much easier to put those holes in first. So here we go. Remember, as you're putting your holes in, you're supporting your clay on both sides, just so that you're not distorting any of your pieces. So thank you so much for watching part 2 in this 5-part series. Over on the next video, we will be covering different textures that you can put into your polymer clay with objects that you've got just lying around your house. So thank you so much for watching this, and I will see you on the next video. Bye!